Hey everyone, I purposely waited to make this video to give Battlefield 2042 room to settle in and to give myself enough time to really get to know the game and give it a fair and proper review. Now that we are a few weeks post-launch, I can honestly say that I have mixed feelings about this game, and I would like to take some time to point out a few things I have noticed since jumping into 2042. Battlefield 2042 was rumored to have a fall release earlier this year, which created a massive hype train that lasted for months. But as the time passed and the info lacked about the game, that train was quickly running out of steam. By the time the game was finally officially announced on June 9th, and info started to very slowly roll out over the next few months, the hype turned to skepticism at an alarming rate. The beta was released in early October, and it was a buggy mess to say the least, with less than half of the game available to try. Now that the game has fully released, it has been a roller coaster of issues. From persistence data errors right off the hop preventing players from joining a game, to not being able to choose a loadout during the match. This of course providing the game stayed running without dashboarding altogether. Bugs are to be expected at launch with any game of course, and DICE has a pretty solid history of rocky launches, so this was relatively expected heading into it. What I did not expect however, was a lack of content in the main modes of the base game, which I will dive a bit deeper into. It was announced pretty early on that 2042 would not be including a single-player campaign, and that the team at DICE would be focusing all of their energy into the multiplayer side of the game. I enjoy single-player campaigns, and I typically play them before hopping into multiplayer, but Battlefield has always been about multiplayer for me since it has always been an experience like no other. This instantly made me feel like the scale and destruction of 2042 were going to be absolutely next level. Unfortunately, this couldn't be further from the truth. While it is true that the maps are massive, the majority of the space between objectives is barren with no cover beyond the odd large rock or tree, making the maps feel shallow and empty. With 128 player matches, this makes for some very chaotic fights, with shots coming from literally every direction with nowhere to run to. Speaking of running, you will do a lot of that in 2042. There currently is no way to spawn directly into transport vehicles as a passenger when a match begins, leaving most players to run to the majority of objectives. Not to mention that there are very few other transport vehicles in the game like quads. This brings me to the destruction and levolution events in the game. Honestly, I should probably just say levolution events, because the destruction is almost completely absent from the game. The rocket explosion and takeoff on Orbital are neat, but they don't change the gameplay at all. You can do some damage around the map, breaking the odd wall here and there, or an antenna or sign that falls off the building, but the massive map-changing destruction that we've had in previous titles has been reduced to small events that happen without much effect on gameplay. DICE had this mechanic perfected on Battlefield 4 with events like the falling skyscraper on Siege of Shanghai, or Flood Zone where the entire map would flood, changing the entire flow of the match. The most we see now is on Discarded, where you can move certain sections of a ship and pull the side off of one. I believe some containers move on Manifest, but after playing the map a couple of dozen times now, I think I've seen this event happen maybe once, and I honestly have no idea the effect it had. Lastly, I find the maps themselves are somewhat immersion breaking. The entire premise of the game is that the world has been ripped to shreds by uncontrollable storms and the depletion of the planet's energy sources. Yet the locations seem to be in pristine operating condition, with no indication whatsoever that there had been any issues at all, let alone the dystopian future that the preceding stories and Exodus short film would have us believe. It's like the art team and the story writers each had a vision for two completely different games, and they didn't speak until they had completed their portions of the final product. The one exception to this rule is Hourglass, where Mother Nature has reclaimed the city to a certain degree, but it still does not feel ravaged, just abandoned. Speaking of the storms, as I had imagined, the concept has gotten old rather quickly, with the tornado being more of a hindrance than a welcome addition. Especially in modes like Breakthrough, where more often than not they tend to throw you out of bounds. The storms also don't seem to do any noticeable damage to any of the buildings or the environment, taking the break in the immersion that one step further. Since we are on the topic of immersion breaking mechanics, we will talk about the most contentious part of 2042 next, the specialists. As soon as the specialists were announced, it seemed to instantly derail what was left of the hype train surrounding 2042, with many players voicing their concerns with the feature, and others asking for the system to be scrapped altogether with a return to the traditional classes of previous titles. I fell into the latter category myself, as I felt like the specialists were going to be gimmicky and would take away more from the gameplay than add to it, and I feel like I was right with this one. To me, the specialists take away most of the teamwork aspect of Battlefield. There are a couple that are more teamwork oriented, like Angel, Falk, and Irish. But most of the specialists have abilities that only benefit themselves, like Sundance and McKay. The removal of the class system also means that gadgets and weapons are unlocked for all specialists, meaning you never really know who has what for gadgets, and almost everyone has some sort of explosives, whether it be a rocket or C5. This leaves me playing as Angel 99% of the time to ensure I always have and can provide ammo and armor for my team. The reason I mention that they are immersion breaking is they feel completely out of place against the backdrop of the story we were given leading up to 2042. The story was portrayed as dark and gritty, practically post-apocalyptic, but these specialists are all upbeat and kinda awkward, not to mention the cringy post-game one-liners. It honestly feels like DICE sent every department to their own corners for the entirety of development, and then they stitched it all together and called it 2042. There have of course been challenges over the last couple of years, but that excuse can only be dragged out so far. The last point I will touch on regarding the specialists is about their cosmetics. The customization for the specialist requires you to unlock some skins by using the character you want the skin for, but most skins are unlocked by the player level alone. The epic skins you receive for playing the specialist do seem to be slightly lacking though. For instance, when looking at Angel's Mastery in the player card menu, you will see we unlock a skin for T5 and T4, but for the next two levels, which are big jumps in requirements, you receive nothing more than the emblem evolution. I have also hit Mastery 13 for Angel according to the specialist menu, but I have not seen if I have gotten anything from this progression specifically. This brings me to the UI of 2042, or really, lack thereof. One of my biggest complaints about this game is the lack of a scoreboard. Yes, there is a scorecard, but the traditional scoreboard that you can check to see how you stack up against the rest of the players in the match is completely missing in this game. To add to that, if you do not check your score in time before the round ends, there's no way of checking or even seeing your individual stats post-game. All stats for your squad are grouped together. There's also no overall stats menu for you to check your KD, score, or vehicle stats. BF4 was amazing for this. It even came with a companion app called Battlelog where you could check a whole range of different stats at any given time. When Hardline came out, it was promised that it would be added, but never fully was. Battlelog was discontinued with the release of Battlefield 1, marking the steady decline in what was offered, with Battlefield 5 having very few stats available. I would love to see a full spectrum stats page added back to the main menu, as well as a full and proper scoreboard added back to the game. The other side of this is the matchmaking itself. Lobbies disband after every match now, and there's no server browser or matchmaking options at all. Meaning, if there is a map you do not like or want to play, your only recourse for avoiding that map is to cancel the matchmaking if that map pops up. I do have other concerns about 2042, but most of which are bug related or just weird controller response on console, and I expect these to get sorted out in time, so I won't go into it too much. But I would love to see some sort of response curve options in the settings to really dial things in. I have had auto rotation turned off for years, but since the launch of 2042, I have been challenging myself to play with aim assist turned completely off, which sounds like it was a blessing in disguise when I heard about all the aim assist issues that the game was having pre-patch. The reason I mention this is I feel the controls are both too fast and too slow, especially in the choppers. It feels like the dead zone for the pitch on the choppers is insane, with no response from the chopper until almost halfway on the stick. It would be nice to see more options to adjust these settings. It's not all bad on the Battlefield this year though. Even though the game has its issues, it is still a fun game to play and does have some faint feelings of previous titles. Although the controls for the choppers are kinda wonky, I'm loving the aerial battles and carnage that can be dealt with them, and you will find me in the sky any chance I can get. The gunplay in the game started out very strange, but I can say it is getting better and better with every update. With the most recent update before the release of this video, patch 3.1, the game is feeling closer than ever to a true Battlefield game, and only the seasonal content that we get going forward will truly tell us how much content this game will ultimately have. As time passes, I'm hopeful that DICE will add more life to the current maps and make future maps for the upcoming seasons more in line with the story. It will also be interesting to see what they add for specialists and weapons going forward. Speaking of weapons, the weapon selection in the base game is rather limited, but does come with a decent range of weapons to start with. I've personally found myself gravitating between the K30 and SVK, dusting in some AK-24 here and there depending on the engagement range. This is another advantage of running as Angel, as the specialist gadget can deploy a loadout resupply crate, which will allow you to swap between any of your predetermined loadouts at any time with a short cooldown. As mentioned earlier, the guns in 2042 felt odd and inaccurate at launch, but with a few updates under their belt now, the weapons feel much better and the gunplay has drastically improved in my opinion. The plus menu is a positive addition as well, giving you the ability to quickly swap between 3 preset attachments per category on the fly. I will admit though, I don't use 75% of the functionality of this feature and tend to only swap scopes here and there, but that could just be me not using it to its full potential. The attachments themselves are rather limited, with several boasting the same attributes. This is most prevalent with the foregrip options. The attachments are unlocked by using the specific weapons thankfully, but just like the specialists, most skins are acquired by your soldier level, with only a couple of higher tier skins available separated by large requirement intervals. The vehicles in 2042 in my opinion are the one area where DICE hit the nail on the head. Each vehicle I have played has that classic Battlefield feel, with tanks, planes, choppers, and an assortment of other vehicles available. They dominate the battlefield and give a very nostalgic Battlefield 4 feeling. I found myself right at home with the Nightbird, taking me right back to the many hours of flight time with the Little Bird of Battlefield 4. I will say though, with every player having the option to have anti-air rockets on hand, it is much harder to stay airborne for long periods. The tanks feel great and powerful, but make sure to keep on the move to avoid C5 drones. The new additions to the vehicular arsenal like the hovercraft and the Bolt are just straight fun to drive, even if they are a little tough to control. The Hind and the Condor can be devastating in the hands of a skilled pilot, providing a nice platform for players to rain down hell from above. The last portion of 2042 that I want to talk about is the other 2 modes that are available, Hazard Zone and Portal, and to be honest, I left this for last for a reason. I played Hazard Zone for the first couple of weeks after launch, but honestly got bored with the mode relatively quickly and never felt any real draw to play it. The same goes for Portal. I played a few rounds, but since the XP and weapon progression was not available in the mode until recently, I found myself sticking to the all-out warfare modes as my main focus. Portal is a neat concept, but again, I have not felt drawn to it at all. I didn't have a ton of interest in Portal going into the launch, but I did have high hopes for Hazard Zone. Hopefully the mode gets more support than Firestorm did, and DICE finds a way to give some good incentive to grind it. In summary, I want to love 2042, I really do, but this is not the game I was hoping that it would be. It honestly feels hollow and rushed. It has some good elements, and the graphics are amazing, but it feels like a shell of what Battlefield used to be. I think the game would have greatly benefited from being delayed a year to polish the game and add much more rich and relevant content. With not having a single player story and no real destruction in the game, it seems like these were traded to get the 128 players or to make the tornadoes work. But I personally would have rather still been playing 64 player lobbies that feature fully destructible maps with truly game-changing Levolution events. They do have a solid basis for a game, but it just feels hollow and stitched together. Time will tell what DICE adds to the game through the seasons going forward, but I hope this game doesn't go down in history the same way that Hardline did. As a very long-time Battlefield fan, I will say that 2042 is not a complete miss, but it is not an instant hit. I will be sticking it out with the game of course though, as my love for the franchise still drives me to play the game, and I am very curious to see where it goes and ultimately ends up over its life cycle. So expect to see lots more 2042 videos amongst the rest of our content in the near future. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, keep gaming.